With the Dutch Grand Prix weekend done and dusted, F1's next stop would be the Temple of Speed, otherwise known as Monza, or one of those drug dens in East London. Probably. Anyway, with Max Verstappen back on top in terms of the championship, it was time for Mercedes, Lewis Hamilton, and maybe Valtteri Bottas to bring the fight back to Red Bull in Italy. Hey there guys, I'm Will and welcome to FP1, the channel that takes time out of its very busy schedule every time it gets an opportunity to call Nikita Mazepin a twat. This week, as I mentioned earlier, we were back in Italy for the 14th round of the season, or 13th if you're still pissed about Belgium. Before we get into the action, if you end up enjoying the video, make sure you drop it a like and subscribe to the channel, as it really helps me out. Now, I promise I'll leave it short and sweet this time. Let's just get straight into the video. So, as we always do at this point, let's talk about the news. And f*** me, because this week there was a lot of it. With Kimi calling it quits last weekend, Alfa Romeo announced his replacement as Valtteri Bottas for 2022, replacing one Finn that everyone wanted to move on with another Finn who everyone wanted to move on. Except this one tells you to f*** off every time he does his job properly. And can I just say here that I just find it so funny that they're trying to play it off as Bottas chose to leave Mercedes. Yes, he decided to leave the team who've won everything since 2014 and move to Alfa Romeo. And I'm running for Love Island next season, guys, come on. This paved the way for Mercedes to announce George Russell as Lewis Hamilton's teammate for next season, in a move that absolutely nobody saw coming. Look, I've made a video on this, let's just move on already. Now, perhaps more shocking was the final bit of driver transfer news ahead of this week's race, which came in the form of Alex Albon returning to F1 with Williams next year. This would make a lot of fans happy, and me especially, given that he was the butt of 99% of my jokes before this guy came along. Two final things before we get into practice is that Kimi Räikkönen would sit out once again, being replaced by Robert Kubica for a second weekend in a row, and that the Monza weekend would mark the second usage of the F1 sprint race format, much to the delight of me and the 5 other people that apparently like this thing. With that out of the way, let's get into FP1, where it turned out that Robert Kubica wasn't the only surprise comeback this weekend. Talk about track limits was also back, and sadly not the series on this channel everybody watched a few months ago. This would catch out several drivers in FP1 and over the course of the weekend, with most of the trouble occurring at the final corner, Parabolica, or whatever the hell they've decided to call it now. It would be Lewis Hamilton on top for Mercedes though at the end of first practice, with Verstappen splitting the two Mercedes in second and Lance Stroll looking strong in his Aston Martin in fourth. And now, due to the sprint weekend, we jump straight into qualifying, a session that in recent years has turned the Temple of Speed into the car park of standstill. Sorry, even for me, that joke was f***ing shit. That aside, this year's running would be no different, with front runners like Verstappen getting caught out, as everyone else decided it was behave like Nikita Mazepin Day in Q1. However, at the end of the session, it was the usual suspects who failed to make the cut, with George Russell initially looking like he hadn't made it until Yuki Tsunoda forgot what track limits were and had his lap time deleted. Q2 would be more of the same, as the Alpines, Aston Martins and Russell failed to progress. The big shock once again, however, happened to be Italian Jesus, who seemed to have come alive in qualifying ever since he realised Ferrari don't control that Alpha seat anymore. Gio would finish 10th in Q3, as Verstappen and Hamilton battled for the sprint race pole, and early indications suggested that #Blessed had it in the bag, qualifying 4/10 faster than Verstappen on his final run. The McLarens also showed strong form, with Norris and Ricciardo hot on the heels of Verstappen come the end of the session. But this was when something truly incredible happened, something that nobody really saw coming. Valtteri Bottas was actually quick.
That's impossible.
Yeah, somehow Porridge Man managed to set 3 purple sectors and jump to the top of the time screens. Now, if only you'd done this a little earlier, Valtteri, maybe you wouldn't be fighting with Nikita Mazepin next season, now would you? And this, of course, brings an end to Friday and on to Saturday, where we had FP2 ahead of the sprint race itself. Said practice session was looking like a relatively quiet one early on. However, Carlos Sainz then decided to continue his Saturday morning tradition of rearranging the front end of his Ferrari. This crash at Ascari would turn out to be only the start of Ferrari's woes at their home race, as later on, Charles Leclerc came to be under the weather in the other car. #Blessed would make it a practice clean sweep meanwhile, edging out teammate Bottas by 0.2 of a second, as both Alfa Romeo showed promise in the top 10. So now, for the second ever F1 sprint race, the format loved by the F1 community about as much as the Argentinians love the British. Bottas would get away well from pole, but the same couldn't be said for that of teammate Hamilton, who slipped back behind the McLarens and the AlphaTauri of Pierre Gasly. Speaking of last year's Monza winner, he was looking to make up places on the start, running side by side with Hamilton before his front wing pulled out the white flag and yeeted his car into the barrier. The resulting safety car brought the pack back together and meant those starting on soft tyres could now comfortably go to the end of the race, meaning this was great news for McLaren, who were now running P3 and P4 with Ricciardo and Norris. While Hamilton tried to close up to Lando, Sergio Perez was filling the role of Red Bull's second driver. In other words, he was just being a bit After a poor quali on Friday, the Mexican was struggling to get past the Aston Martin of Lance Stroll, eventually deciding to cut turn 2 and just pray Michael Massey was fondling his red flag or something. Sadly, Massey and the stewards happened to be paying attention, ordering Sergio to let Lance back past again before investigating the incident anyway. Fernando Alonso would be another driver on the move, pulling a great move on Sebastian Vettel that sprint race haters just seem to have forgotten about. Convenient, that. But up at the front, there was no beating Valtteri Bottas, as the Finn comfortably took the win after 18 laps, followed by Verstappen and Daniel Ricciardo. Now, in normal circumstances, this would mean Bottas would start on pole for Sunday's main event, though Mercedes decided to pick this weekend as the one where he'd take an engine penalty, and therefore be relegated to the back of the grid. This guy literally has no luck, does he? This then would leave us with a Verstappen-Ricciardo front row, with Hamilton only 4th after his poor start and the likes of Bottas and Perez also out of position. But how would this translate in the race? Well, let's find out. Now, if you know me, then you may know I'm a rather big fan of Daniel Ricciardo. So, without spoiling much, let's just say I'm going to be getting very drunk tonight. Danny got a perfect start and jumped Max Verstappen heading down into turn 1. Antonio Giovinazzi also made a good getaway, until he took the Italian line going through the second chicane. The championship rivals were at it as well, Lewis trying to get past Max, but bailing out to avoid contact. Now I wonder if this will be important later on. Sebastian Vettel was having a bit of a mare in the opening laps, being forced out wide by Danny's Cash and then making contact with the Alpine of Esteban Ocon. But it was still looking good for Danny Rick, as Verstappen struggled to close the gap to the McLaren in front. The Dutchman's race was about to get even worse, with a slow pit stop giving the advantage to #blessed behind. This wasn't looking good for the championship leader, who was looking set to lose said lead were Hamilton to stay ahead. I guess in Max's mind, there was only really one thing he could do, and that was obviously to attempt to behead Lewis Hamilton. Max and Lewis collided once again this season into turn 2, in a move that reawakened all the closet racists on Twitter. Now, if you want my thoughts, well, I'll delve into them a little bit later on. Hey, look, I've got to get that watch time somehow. Anyway, with the safety car out, the race had now been turned on its head, but things were still looking good for McLaren, with now 2 cars in the top 3. Lando then sent his 3-year-old Stans into even more of a frenzy, by overtaking Leclerc on the restart and setting up a 1-2 for the Woking squad. Things weren't going so well further back for everyone's favourite duo Nikita Mazepin and Mick Schumacher. The two claimed their relationship was irreparable after Zandvoort, and Mazepin decided he'd apply the same description to their cars, crashing into Schumacher in an incident that would eventually put him out of the race. No complaints from me though, this just makes the video I made last year age even better. Now, we haven't spoken about Valtteri Bottas in a while, but the Finn was continuing his strong weekend, having started from the back. Unfortunately, after the restart though, Valtteri Bottas remembered that he was Valtteri Bottas, and sat behind Sergio Perez for the remainder of the Grand Prix. He would find himself promoted to the podium however, as Perez decided to take yet another position off the track, picking up a 5-second penalty in the process. But all was going well for Daniel Ricciardo and McLaren, as the Aussie crossed the line to take his first race win since Monaco in 2018, and Lando coming home in P2. McLaren's first 1-2 since Canada 2010, which is still a stat I can't quite believe. Anyway, big hats off to Daniel, and also to Lando, who I really think showed his maturity today by agreeing not to fight Daniel for the win. And as you may be able to tell, I'm rather happy about this, especially after defending Daniel all year. It's just so good to see him back on top. As for the championship rivals, the more I watch it back, the more I have to blame Verstappen. And just to be clear, that's not because I'm a #blessed simp, before you start having that aneurysm in the comments section. That move was just never on for me, but I doubt this will be the last time we see these two come to blows this season. But I do hope you enjoyed the race and the comedy review. If you are new here, we're trying to aim for 50,000 subscribers by the end of the year, so if you like the video, be sure to drop it a like and subscribe for content like this every single week. Now, I'm off to get very, very drunk, so I'll see you soon with another video, but until then, have a good one.